Back in my K-Rool video, I covered a lot of the corporate lore surrounding the big Kroc's absence from the retro duology of country games. I was pretty settled into the understanding that they just decided to try something new, but that whole dynamic shattered into a million pieces recently. The excellent Kiwi Talks had a roundtable review of Donkey Kong Bonanza with some of the developers that were responsible for Retro's output. Kynan Pearson, senior designer for Returns, and Ted Anderson, environmental artist on Returns and Tropical Freeze. I'll link it at the end of the video for your enjoyment. As always, Reese does incredible work allowing us to peek behind the curtains of game development. It's a great look at how different minds approach different problems. When the group got around to discussing the ending, Pearson had this to say about the big reveal.
It's a little heartbreaking to me because, as fans, when we started working on Donkey Kong Country Returns, we were asked to create new villains and not rely on that.
We heard in interviews that Miyamoto and Tanabe decided to try something new for the DKC revival, but this adds a lot of color to that outline. The answer remains mostly the same. Some higher up on the project made the call, but I'm curious about the how and why. If you are too, buckle in. We're gonna dig into some sublayers and rediscover why K-Rool didn't make the cut. Before we can do that, I need to lay out a couple of considerations for our conversation here. These discussions can get a little out of hand and lead to a bunch of insults and finger pointing. I will come to some conclusions about people working on these projects, and so will you. I will agree or disagree with the merit of those decisions, but I'm not trying to rag on any of the developers of Returns or anyone in general. I hope that's evident with all my videos, but I just want to be upfront with this one. All I want to do is come to more of an understanding of how these sorts of calls are made. Let's be reasonable in the comments section. With the disclaimer out of the way, let's address the new claim. Retro did not make the call to move away from the Kremlings. This isn't coming from some random employee either. Kynan Pearson was a senior designer for Country Returns, the 5th credited staff member at the end of the game. He was featured in the Iwata Asks interview for the project, recounting his many conversations with the upper echelon of Nintendo. While it is possible that he could be misremembering or stretching the truth, I don't think that's the case. Speaking of the interview, the Retro Studios designers shared their experience going to Kyoto in 2008 to meet with Iwata and Miyamoto. They scoped the vision for the project and got direction on where to take it. I imagine these conversations led to the decision to cut the Kremlings out of this entry in the franchise. Based on Tanabe's version of the story, he was talking to Miyamoto about what parts of the series were vital. The Iwata Asks interview calls out dense levels, challenge, and music as core parts of the series. When the subject of the big Kroc came up in internal discussions, they wondered if they really needed him.
You know, we're getting together and we're like, well, what are we going to do about King K-Rool? Is he coming back? And we thought about it and we said, well, does he really need to? Why don't we just come up with something completely new? And this time, make sure there are no crocodiles in there. Make sure there are no crocodiles in there. Make sure there are no crocodiles in there.
I don't know who else was at that table, but we can safely assume that Tanabe or Miyamoto made the call. You see, I dabble in the occasional Paper Mario title, and I was aware of the whole brand identity upheaval for that series. There was a whole hubbub about mandates and design principles, and it got kinda dramatic. Arlo made a video about Tanabe's incoming retirement, and it reminded me about that whole Paper Mario saga. All of a sudden, I remembered that phrase, do we really need blank? I want to hone in on a specific interview for Sticker Star. This was a soft reboot of the series, reforming a bunch of different aspects of it. In the interview, Iwata covers the abandonment of Paper Mario's RPG roots. Tanabe details a conversation with Miyamoto, and what do you know? There's that phrase again. Here's the quote. Aside from wanting us to change the atmosphere a lot, there were two main things that Miyamoto-san said from the start of the project. It's fine without a story, so do we really need one? As much as possible, complete it with only characters from the Super Mario world. Now, a lot of people take this as a friendly suggestion from Miyamoto, but all my homies in the corporate office know that a suggestion from your boss isn't really a suggestion a lot of times. I've never worked for a Japanese corporation, but I've heard the legends. Some Kiwi Talks interviews describe the Japanese Nintendo staff freezing when Iwata would enter a room. Tanabe was the producer of Sticker Star and DKC Returns, but Miyamoto held an incredible amount of influence as general manager of EAD, among other roles he filled at the time, not to mention being the guy behind the characters in the first place. If you're gonna disagree with Mr. Donkey Mario Zelda, you better be ready to lay down your life for that disagreement. While Tanabe certainly had a seat at the table, it's not hard to imagine marching orders being given sometimes. We don't see much of Tanabe's personal opinion expressed in this Iwata Asks interview, besides him recounting a time where he made Miyamoto angry about Bowser's characterization. When Origami King came out, he said it was no longer possible to make the sorts of characters classic Paper Mario fans were asking for. That doesn't sound like the language of someone who's calling that shot. It sounds like the language of someone who's doing their best with the hand that they were dealt. After all this digging, I can't know for sure, but I have the strong feeling that Miyamoto specifically made the call to cut the Kremlings. And let me be clear here again. I'm not trying to make some sort of hit piece on him or jump jump into the whole does he hate stories or not debate. I just think in retrospect, that appears to be the case. And honestly, that's fair enough. I would have preferred Krocs, but you gotta try something new every once in a while. Reggie Fils-Aimé once remarked that making Nintendo games is difficult because people want it to be the way it's always been, but better. That's a lot easier said than done. We want these games to feature all the locations and characters we've grown to love, especially with how infrequent the new entries happen. At the same time, I don't think we want to do the same Donkey Kong Country dance every time. They weren't trying to remake DKC, they were trying to recapture its essence. They cherished the ambient music, minecarts, and detailed levels, but didn't find the enemy faction to be a crucial part of the formula. I also think Nintendo as a company was starting to rein in some of the more out there elements of their franchises in the early 2010s. They threw everything at the wall during the GameCube era. They let Mario rap in a Japanese commercial. They let him get tattoos. They let Mario ball with photorealistic athletes. But as they redefined their place in the market with the Wii, there was a sense of brand purity that was being forged behind the scenes. Now that we have boatloads of Mario merchandise, 2 movies, and a theme park, I think we can surmise why Nintendo was having these sorts of defining conversations with their characters and worlds. The deal with Universal was announced in 2015, but these enterprise joint ventures take at least a year to iron out. Probably way more. If they announced the partnership in 2015, how many years back do you think Nintendo was exploring the idea of going truly beyond the realm of gaming? If Nintendo was going to break into smartphones, theme parks, and movies, they would need to really nail down the essence of some of these brands. They could get experimental again down the road, but they needed to redefine what the vanilla version of Mario and Donkey Kong and Zelda was. This is where the phrase Mario mandates come in, and yes, mandates for Mario definitely exist. I imagine anything was on the table in the early days, but most intellectual properties have a Bible of sorts to lay out the rules of engagement. They seem like dictatorial demands from on high, but they're meant to be guardrails to ensure the IP doesn't lose its identity over time. I'm not saying I agree with every decision that's made because of these guidelines, but they are necessary. In the case of Donkey Kong, I don't think there was any sort of hatred of the Kremling characters. They were all over the place in the Wii generation, with Jungle Climber, Barrel Blast, Mario, Baseball, and Soccer featuring them prominently. My guess would be that after so much time with Rare's conception of DK's world, Miyamoto wanted to try something new. Constraints often breed creativity. The Donkey Kong character would not exist without the constraint of not having the Popeye license. Mario wouldn't have a mustache if he was made with less graphical limitations. Donkey Kong Jr. wouldn't have been created if Miyamoto was able to realize his original idea for the arcade sequel. Cutting off some options isn't always a bad thing. It's not the call I would have made in the case of Donkey Kong Country Returns, but someone had to make it. From a gameplay standpoint, the Tikis were genius. Having enemies with entirely flat heads in a platformer is a big dose of that classic form-following function design that Nintendo built their name on. They lack the pizzazz of the Kremlings, but we gotta give them their flowers. For the record, I think the Snowmads were great too. While I think that the Kremlings in general and K. Rool in particular are a big part of the franchise's appeal, I don't necessarily want them to endlessly go back to that well. Variety is the spice of life, gamers. I honestly did not mind when the games came out. The only part of the experience that was odd was the toxic online discussion that came out of a series of assumptions about a Japanese game executive none of us have ever met. The narratives that Nintendo hates the Kremlings or they were stupid anyway were exhausting, false, and much less dramatic than we made them out to be. I hope that we can keep these conversations respectful and educational in the future. It's happening right now with Star Fox. Nintendo made a bold move with Falco's legs here, and I have strong opinions about it. I don't hold any ill will toward the devs or people that like it though. I'm gonna give it a swing myself because I love Star Fox and maybe it'll grow on me. I do not love the newer Paper Mario games, but I had a good time playing them despite the design decisions that I would have handled differently myself. Now that time has passed, I'm glad they tried some new things and even more glad they reintroduced the Kremlings into the series. I think they're here to stay. They might not be used for every title and I don't even really want them to do that, but I think we'll get plenty of Kroc action in the new Kong era. Even though the devs are still being a little shy about K. Rool being in Bonanza, we're treated to some Kroc animations every month on Nintendo Today. This app might not be in your news rotation, but it's a huge point of focus for the company at the moment. The way you're seeing these franchises represented on the app is the way Nintendo wishes to present them to a wide audience. Krocs or no Krocs, I can't wait to see what they do next with the series. I think a new Donkey Kong Country game will hit in 2028, and if you want to hear more predictions, you can check out my video on the future of Donkey Kong.